So on this video, what I'm going to be doing is replacing that stripped out bolt or nut. I wasn't really sure what the issue was. I just knew I couldn't get that plastic cover off the hood of the engine there. So as I was spinning that 10 millimeter cap nut or whatever it's called, it was just spinning around and around and around, and it's actually moving the cover a little bit. So I wasn't sure if it was the bolt that was stripped in the base there. Turned out that really wasn't it, but I thought that's what it was initially, but it turned out I think it was more just the bolt threads were stripped and the nut wasn't coming off. I just couldn't get it off. So anyways, I ground down enough to get that cover off. Actually kind of broke the plastic cover a little bit around the nut or the bolt and had to glue that back together again later. That wasn't a big deal. But had to get this bolt out because it was pretty useless for me. I could have just cut it off and then just used the one bolt on the other side, but I didn't want to do that. So got my Dremel. As you can see here, I'm trying to cut the cap off. I can't go right to the bottom of the base of the bolt right away because there's a little collar in there that you'll see in a minute that I wanted to save. So I just took off the top with the Dremel, finally popped the old nut off, and then you see this collar that I grabbed. I got to glue that back inside the cover, the plastic cover in the hole to protect that and sort of shore that up. So put that aside and then grab the Dremel again, and now I'm just going to cut off that top bolt, and then my plan was to drill out the actual the base of that bolt, but just the heat from the Dremel actually had the whole thing melt in that plastic housing there. So when I grabbed the bolt to snap it so I could get in there and more easily drill it out, you'll see in a second that just the whole assembly there just pulls out of the plastic because I guess it got hot enough that it was just melted. So anyways, regardless, that's what my goal was. I wanted to do that. And so now I wanted to just get a bolt. I think it was an M5 bolt. I'll put it in the description. And that would give me enough of the same thread so that if I got a nut on there, it would be the same 10 millimeter nut that I could use on the other side. So same thread, same size. So eventually I'll get that same cap nut. So just putting it into place to make sure everything's lined up properly, and it did. So there's the cover. Put a washer on there temporarily because I don't have that cap nut. But once I get the cap nut, that'll totally fix that issue. Same size nut anyways as the other side, so that's cool. And once we got that all sorted out, got the cover back off it again, and then I was able to go in and clear it out. Just make sure it fit in there. It was nice and snug. I actually took a big drill bit, cleared it out just a little bit. Yeah, I didn't show you that part, but whatever size nut head you might be using or bolt head you might be using might just pop right into that hole. So if that's the case, awesome, you're set. But really all I wanted to do is get that bolt and then epoxy it into that housing. It's a plastic housing, so I can't weld it in because there's no metal to weld it into. So you'll see in a second what I grabbed was some JB Weld, which is steel reinforced epoxy. And there's a collar I just put there on the air intake chamber. I'm going to glue that back up inside the plastic housing right there. You can see that. And that was pretty easy. I did that separately. I'm trying to trim it a little bit just to get that to slide in, but it glued in nicely. And then we got the JB Weld steel and reinforced epoxy. I have that laying around all the time because it's super useful. It takes a while to harden up, which is totally fine. So if you're going to be doing it on things, you either want to clamp it in place. I think it hardens up in like 4 or 5 hours or so, but it takes about 15 hours, so kind of like overnight to be really solid and give you exactly what you're looking for. Really easy to mix. You put equal parts of the hardener and the resin down. I think I did about an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch of each, just a little strip. I thought that would be enough to fill up the base there where the bolt was going to go in, and it was. Mix that for about 30 seconds. Super easy to do. Just get a nice consistent blend of the resin and the hardener. Once that was all done, then I just sort of packed it in there. Grabbed a stick that you can see I'm mixing it with. Just gently packed it in around the base of that bolt. Try to be careful because I don't want to get the epoxy too high up the bolt and then the nut doesn't go down on it. That would suck. So just make sure it stayed low. Obviously the height of the collar that I was going to glue back into the plastic housing there, that kind of gave me the room that I had. So if I kept the epoxy off the thread from that height down, that would be perfect. So just sort of packed it in there. Really just took a bit of time. Maybe, I'm thinking about it now, maybe I should have popped a little bit in the base of that hole before I pushed the bolt head down into it. So that way I had it below and above. But after I got that in there and epoxied it in, let it sit overnight, I cranked on that bolt the next day. It was not moving at all. So that worked out really well. I was pretty happy with that. So as you can see, I just smoothed that out the previous day. This is the next morning. It is solid. I probably could have filed that down a little bit now that it's all dried up, but totally cool with the way it looks. Worked great, super strong and solid, and it's the same size bolt as on the other side, so I can just get the similar cap nut for that on the right side there that I have on the left side. And just a little test fit there. You can see the collar I glued into the cover, and just sort of wiggle them down. Got a steel washer in there to make up for the fact that the nut that I'm going to use doesn't have a collar on it, but totally cool. That works great. There's the old collar. There's the new little nut that I'm going to be using. But that really worked well. I was pretty happy with that. Pretty simple fix, but annoying when you don't have that cover working properly. So pretty happy with the whole process and how it turned out, and yeah, allows me to get on to the next project.